Hello, as you all know, Netflix recently released the series Avatar: The Legend of Aang, where the protagonist, able to master the four elements, will have to restore balance in the world, facing abysmal and unknown forces. Will he succeed? Well, make yourselves comfortable, because now we are going to talk about the live-action adaptation of the well-known Avatar series. It all starts with a chase scene through the capital of the Fire Nation. The Fire Soldiers chase an Earthman through the streets. He is captured and brought before the Fire Lord, Sozi. He reveals a plan to wage war with the world, find the as yet undiscovered Avatar Eri, and kill him. He then proceeds to burn the Earthbender alive, and the opening credits explain the Avatar cycle, and that a young Airbender named Aang may not be ready for the responsibility of controlling the four elements and keeping the world at peace. We are now in the Southern Air Temple. Aang's mentor Gyatso speaks to the Air Council, as he does not believe that Aang is prepared for the responsibility of being the Avatar, for they may not be able to wait to begin his training. Mong Gyatso breaks the news to Aang. Unsettled by the news and fearful of the responsibility, Aang takes a walk with his aerial bison friend Appa. But things get more intense, as moments later, the Fire Nation launches a surprise attack on the Southern Air Temple. Due to the power of the Sozin comet in the sky, the Firebenders have extra strength. They manage to conquer the entire. Gyatso gives his life defending a group of children. Aang and Appa get caught in a storm and are hit by a giant wave. Just before drowning, Aang suddenly glows blue and encloses himself in a ball of ice, giving us to understand that he masters the water. At the same time, in the Southern Water Tribe, we meet Katara and her brother Sokka, who go fishing, and Sokka tells her to keep her water control ability a secret. But at that moment, an iceberg explodes and sends a beam of blue light to land into the sky. A young Fire Nation boy with a scar on his face seems happy to see this, but at that moment, Aang emerges from the broken iceberg, unconscious. Katara demands that he be returned to the village despite Sokka's protests. The scarred young man is Prince Zuko, banished from the Fire Nation until he can find the Avatar. His uncle Iroh takes care of him. Aang awakens as if from a nightmare, confused by his new surroundings. Katara's grandmother explains to Aang that he has been frozen for 100 years and is the last of the Airbenders, as they are all extinct. We would also see Zuko's ship approach Wolf Cub. Sokka reluctantly hides Aang, but loses in a fight to Zuko. Seeing so much suffering, Aang approaches offering to have the Water Tribe spared. Iroh talks briefly with Aang on Zuko's boat, and then Aang escapes with the help of Appa, Sokka, and Katara. Unable to return home, Katara and Sokka go with Aang to the Southern Air Temple. Upon discovering Gyatso's bones, Aang is racked with grief and glows blue again, summoning immense power. The memory of his bond with his former master Gyatso calms him, and Aang vows to learn the ways of the Avatar and bring balance to the world. Now we're on to Prince Zuko on a rampage. Aang escaped and stole his notebook. Using Zuko's notebook, Aang decides to visit Avatar Kyoshi's house. Katara convinces Sokka to stay with Aang instead of returning home. At the same time, Aang pays his respects to monk Gyatso, and then they head to Kyoshi Island. A flying lemur from the island appears and joins them. To Sokka's dismay, Aang calls him Momo. Uncle Iroh teaches Zuko the art of tact instead of brute force and the need for sticky rice. Aang, Sokka, and Katara are captured upon arrival on the island by a deadly group of non-masters called Kyoshi warriors. However, their salvation comes with one of them, a young girl named Suki, who convinces her mother, Yukari, the island's leader, to give them the let her stay for 48 hours. Suki and Sokka have some romantic tension. Zuko and Iroh's meeting with Commander Shao does not go well. Shao is suspicious of them and finds a clue about the Avatar. Aang discovers that he can access the past avatars within him, realizing that he is more powerful than he thinks. In deep meditation, the glow returns, and he learns from Avatar Kyoshi herself, the one we saw in his temple, the statue. She tells him that the glow is the avatar state, which allows him to access and channel the power and knowledge of all past avatars. However, he must train very hard to achieve this state and master the bending of all the elements in order to harness this power. While Aang remains in this avatar state, Commander Shao arrives. He and his soldiers prepare to search the city for an outsider, but the Kyoshi warriors attack. Zuko and Iroh find Aang at the Kyoshi shrine. Zuko defeats Katara in a brutal fight, but Aang harnesses the power of the Kyoshi avatar and comes to the rescue. In fact, completely transforms into Kyoshi herself and has so much power that he is overly grounded and sends the Fire Nation soldiers running. With a better idea of the extent of his responsibility, Aang leaves Kyoshi Island and heads to the Northern Water Tribe in hopes of saving them from a mysterious danger he saw in his meditation. Suki and Sokka kiss, and she gives him a steel folding fan, the signature weapon of the Kyoshi warriors. Sokka is now determined to stay with Aang, Katara, Appa and Momo. At the same time, Commander Shao insists on working with Zuko and Iroh to capture the Avatar. However, Shao writes a letter informing Fire Lord Osai that the Avatar has returned. Now we are going to see the end of a deception. We are with Zuko's sister Princess Azula, who leads a group of motley rebels right at the foot of their enemy, Fire Lord Osai. Osai kills them easily. Katara struggles to master the ways of her water scroll while Zuko fights about a plan to trap the Avatar. Meanwhile, Aang and company in Omashu, Earthrealm City, follow what appears to be another Airbender. It turns out that Theo is not an Airbender, as they soon discover, and he actually flies in an invention made by his father. Sai finds himself in the middle of a Fire Nation bombardment. Aang decides to stay and help. Here we meet Azula's friends, Mai and Tili. Azula wants the throne and fears that Zuko is the one. She learns that Sai is secretly talking to the Fire Nation and meets Jet, the boy who helped them sneak into Omashu. They track down Sai's contacts and fight them with the help of Jet's crew. Aang and Theo discover that someone else was behind the explosion. Katara and Jet bond over their struggles with loss due to the war. Jet tells her to remember the good things about her mother before she died from bending. This helps create the water whip successfully. Meanwhile, Sokka, Aang and Katara do not put themselves in danger. Agree on whether Sai or Jet was behind the explosion. At the same time, Zuko and Iroh arrive in Umashu, while Sao begins to conspire with Azula. Jet claims responsibility for the bombings. He plans to blow up Sai and the king for conspiring with the Fire Nation. Suki and Iroh confront Aang, while Sokka and Katara go to save Sai and Theo. A brutal duel begins here. Zuko and Aang clash brutally. However, despite the lethality of the duel, Zuko must refrain from using fire so as not to expose himself to the Earth Nation. But when Aang lets slip that he has read Zuko's diary, Zuko becomes so angry that he unleashes fire and is forced to flee. Sokka and Katara climb up the huge delivery chutes to the top of Umashu. Katara is able to use the water whip technique to extinguish Longshot's fire arrow, meant to ignite the bomb. However, Sai and Theo, the Earth King, are saved. Iroh openly uses fire to drive Zuko's soldiers away, but nevertheless, surprisingly, Longshot is able to use fire to extinguish the bomb. That Aang is captured by the soldiers of the Earth Nation. We are now in the darkness of the dungeons of Omashu. Aang and Iroh are in cells side by side and they talk about the war and the past. Meanwhile, Sai confesses to his son Theo and Sokka that he was indeed working with the Fire Nation. The Earth King summons Aang, and it turns out that something very interesting happened. Well, it just so happens that King Bumi is Aang's childhood friend, so he's about 110 years old, and they joke about it, but Bumi has gone a little crazy. Elsewhere, Katara talks to Jet again about her plan to blow up Sai and King Bumi. She freezes him in a wooden stand and leaves him. Zuko steals the report from an Earth soldier and sneaks into the dungeons to rescue Uncle Iroh. Meanwhile, to save Aang, Sokka and Katara learn the story of two lovers who founded Omashu. A musician tells the story and shows them the way through a secret tunnel in a mountain. Zuko goes back to catch up with Iroh. Towards the well, Sokka finds a white lotus tile that Iroh bought and then drops it to mark its location. Meanwhile, Iroh suffers abuse along the way due to his past role in the Battle of Ba Sing, as he is accused of having been heartless. But a flashback shows him lamenting the death of his son. At the same time, Sokka and Katara fight in the tunnels but end up having a heart-to-heart. Returning to the Earth Palace, Bumi subjects Aang to a series of meaningless games and berates him for missing 100 years of war. This all ends in an apparent battle to the death between the two. At the same time, Zuko catches up with Iroh and the two defeat part of the land army. Iroh spares the soldier who tried to kill him, but this soldier wounds him. At that moment, the giant mole badgers that taught Oma and Shu, Earth, burst through the tunnels and lead Katara and Sokka to the palace. King Bumi makes it clear that his games were an expression of his frustration at feeling abandoned by Aang, who wanted to show him Ang how he felt about making impossible decisions. Bumi tries to force Ang to kill him or let himself die because friends cannot be trusted. He wanted to teach him this lesson, but at that moment Katara and Sokka arrive. With their help, Ang can save himself and spare King Bumi. Ang replies that only by trusting his friends can he save the world. In addition, we discover that Ang still has the beeson whistle that Bumi made for him. This convinces the grandfather king. Sai informs King Bumi about the Fire Nation spies in Omashu. This allows the Earth Kingdom to prepare for an impending attack. Meanwhile, Zuko and Iroh reflect on their connection and how they have been there for each other after so long and after the death of Iroh's son. Also, Iroh was there for Zuko when he was forced to do this mission, and his face injury was fresh. We are now in a rapid confrontation with the Fire Nation soldiers. Katara is becoming a much stronger waterbender, capable of mastering her element like no one else. Is Aang feeling guilty by the continued destruction of the world by the firebenders, just as they once did in the Air Temple 100 years ago? A nearby village complains of forest sickness and people disappearing. Aang says this is a problem of the spirit world and promises to help. Fire Lord Ozai recognizes Azula's coy flattery as an attempt to assume the throne herself. Now the friends and Aang head to a shrine for the forest spirit. Aang at that time meditates and transports his friends to the spirit world. Meanwhile, Zuko finally discovers that everyone knows that the Avatar has returned. At that moment, the mercenary Yun and her giant hunter Shichu arrive. Iroh and Zuko hire Yun to find Aang and capture him. Meanwhile, in the spirit world, the owl's knowledge warns Aang that Sokka and Katara should not be in the spirit world as they are mere humans. Then the angry forest spirit attacks the gang, as the longer they are here, the more they risk getting trapped. Katara relives traumatic moments in her life, such as the death of her mother, while Sokka relives the day he became a warrior of the Awa tribe. He barely passed and his father doubted his abilities as a leader. They both confront a man in a hideous mask. Aang's spiritual prowess allows him to resist being lured back home. Then the guy in the creepy mask reveals himself to be Go, the face snatcher, a hideous slithering monster. Aang flees and then arrives at a hut, where he surprisingly finds his master Gyatso, who was inside waiting for him. Gyatso explains that Go uses the mist of lost souls to trap people in their darkest memories. He has taken Sokka, Katara and the villagers into his cloak to consume them. Gyatso gives such powerful advice to Aang that it is echoed and applied to Zuko and Zula as well. Aang exits the spirit world and heads off to rescue the souls of his trapped friends. We get to find out a little more about Zuko's past, why he has his scar. He used to seem like a much more happy. He was excited to attend his first battle strategy meeting with his father, Fire Lord Ozai. Xiao is promoted from commander to admiral. He uses this to replace Zuko's authority. The crew is happy to be free of Zuko's leadership, but Iroh warns that they do not know what Zuko has sacrificed. Meanwhile, Aang visits the shrine of Avatar Roku, a firebender. The monks guarding the shrine are no longer peaceful and attack Aang. Shu, a humble man, keeps the monks at bay, while Aang contacts Roku through the shrine. Thus, Roku tells Aang about the totem he stole from Go. Aang hopes to trade it to get Katara and Sokka back. Instead, Jun immediately captures it and hands it over to Iroh and Zuko. Meanwhile, at a battle strategy meeting years ago, Zuko speaks out of turn. He called the general's plan to sacrifice an entire battalion terrible. At that time, Zuko was good, so Ozai demanded Zuko to fight against an Agnikai as penance. An Agnikai is a fire tradition in which two people fight until one is burned, so that Zuko learns his lesson. Back in the present day, Shao takes control of Aang. Iroh encourages patience before making a move to reclaim the Avatar, but a mysterious person in a blue mask sneaks into the fortress where Aang was imprisoned and frees him. The two make their way to the main gate. Shao needs the Avatar alive, so he lets them go, as this mysterious fellow threatens to kill Aang. However, when it looks like they are going to escape and the blue spirit takes Aang behind the door, an archer manages to hit and break the blue spirit's mask, revealing that whoever was behind it was Zuko. Aang takes Zuko to a safe place to try to shelter and save him. Here they begin to bond more as Zuko recovers in a barn. Returning to the flashback of the past, Zuko discovers that he will fight his own father. In the Agni Kai, instead of the general he insulted, so they start the fight, but Zuko refuses to burn his father despite having the opportunity to do so. Zuko receives a severe burn on his face as punishment. Osai then banishes Zuko from the Fire Nation unless he returns with the Avatar to be welcomed back. When Zuko comes to in his boat, Aang asks from the shore if they could have been friends under different circumstances, but Zuko responds with an attack. Aang simply pushes his boat away. Iroh tells the story of Zuko's scar and explains to the lieutenant of his crew that he hates him. That's right, he hates Zuko even though he saved him, because they are actually the battalion that was supposed to be slaughtered, and now they live only because Zuko defended them. When Zuko returns, they all bow down to him. On the other hand, Aang gives the totem to Kosh and rescues Katara and Sokka. The rest of the villagers also return home. We are now with Lieutenant Yi, newly inspired. He enters Zuko's room with a warning. Turns out he heard that the Fire Nation will arrest Zuko for treason. Zuko escapes in a lifeboat. Unfortunately, Shao leaked this information as a trap. He prepared Zuko's ship with explosive jelly and it explodes. Zuko seems to be dead or not. Well, we'll find that out later. Now we're with Aang, who is more accepting of the fact that he doesn't know what he's doing and is grateful to have friends, and Katara calls them Team Avatar. They reach the northern water tribe, who already suspect an imminent threat from the Fire Nation. Iroh suspects Osai is behind Zuko's murder, and Shao boasts that he will lead an assault on the Northern Water Tribe. Katara talks to Master Pagu and identifies with his struggles. Yo enters Sokka to talk. After this, he recalls that in the spirit world, a three-tailed fox wore his headdress and spoke to him with his voice. The leaders of the Water Tribe are disappointed by Aang's lack of training and preparation. Katara learns to heal wounds through water, but discovers that northern women are not allowed to learn to fight. Aang talks to Avatar Kurok at a shrine. Kurok warns that Aang must walk his path alone. Otherwise, his loved ones will suffer. Yue confesses to Sokka that she is, in fact, the fox she saw. In order to survive as a baby, the moon spirit gave Yue its essence. In this way, Yue can travel to the spirit world in her dreams. She kisses Sokka. Master Paku refuses to let Katara train or fight. Aang tells Katara that she should not fight, and that everyone will be better off if he is alone. Shao's plan of attack against the Water Tribe is bold, but he will not listen to Iroh's warning. Zuko, moreover, is still alive and is hiding under the armor of the Fire Nation. Although he is determined to prove his innocence and his ability, he has no plan to capture the Avatar. Iroh suspects that Shao is someone else's pawn. Meanwhile, Azula, the princess of the Fire Nation, is tired of the way Osai treats her. She controls enlightenment, a master-level ability, and demands the chance to shine. Osai happily complies. Sokka and Katara find strength in battle, one into the other, and later Katara challenges Paku to a fight. It is a very epic and brutal duel. Katara stands her ground, but Paku still won't give her his blessing to fight. Katara and Sokka explain to Aang that how he chooses to live as Avatar is his choice alone. Besides, they are a family, and worrying about each other's safety is normal, but no one can stop Katara from fighting, for that was her choice. Now we continue the fight at the precise moment when Team Avatar quickly defeats a Fire Nation battleship. Sokka tries to sneak into the city as the Fire Nation begins bombarding the Water Tribe's ice wall. Master Paku finally decides to let the woman help in the war effort more directly. He even sends young soldiers to serve under Katara's command. At this point in the series, a question arises: does Aang's vision come true? Well, Sao plans to take advantage of the celestial event called the Ice Moon. Tonight, the barrier between the spiritual world and the physical world is thin. Isao intends to use the Avatar Kurok's special knife to kill the moon spirit, but Kurok tells Aang that these elemental spirits are even stronger than the Avatar. At that moment, Momo, the flying lemur, saves a girl from a falling rock, but as a result she is crushed. Yo and Sokka take Momo to a hot spring in a sacred forest. It is where Yo was brought when he was a sick baby. Yo places Momo in the holiest waters and heals him. Sokka, relieved, finally makes it clear that he loves Momo. Sao and Iroh arrive at the sacred forest in search of the moon spirit. Katara at the same time confronts Zuko. Meanwhile, Aang meets Sokka and Yoe. On the other hand, Shao finds the moon spirit. It appears as a white koi fish with a black dot, swimming in a circle with another koi fish with a white dot. Moon and water, push-pull yin-yang is the meaning of this symbolism. Shao plucks the fish from the spring and the world turns red. Iroh threatens Shao. Aang tries to reason with him, but Shao kills the moon spirit. All the waterbenders lose their powers and the world turns grey. Here another question arises. Can Aang walk the path of the Avatar? In a final desperate effort, Aang sacrifices the water spirit, who through Aang, the spirit channels all his anger and wipes out the Fire Nation soldiers. Now the spirit will roam the earth. Thus we see how the whole army of fire falls, and the spirit is channeled through Aang, showing all its power. But now that this spirit will be on earth, it will wander around searching in vain for its mate, causing destruction wherever it passes. Then Yue, who has part of the moon spirit within her, enters the spring and sacrifices herself. In this way, she becomes the spirit of the moon. And so we see the moon return to the sky and the waterbenders regain their powers. Because the water and the moon, pushing and pulling, are reunited, Aang is freed from his bond with the water spirit. In the chaos, Zuko and Sao fight. Zuko defeats Sao and tells him everything. It turns out that Sao has been taking orders from Azula, who knew that Zuko was the blue spirit and helped him devise the plot to kill Zuko. What's more, Zuko's mission to capture the Avatar was a sham from the start, just false hope. Once it turned out to have weight, Osai simply used it to motivate Azula, as she is now next in line for the throne. After the battle, Pakku asks Katara to stay and help train new Aqua apprentices as masters. She politely refuses, telling Pakku that she will teach Aang, and Pakku agrees that there is no one better to teach the Avatar. Reunited, Katara and Sokka talk to Aang about the need to move on. They convince him that he is not to blame for what happened during the last 100 years of war. Remembering Gyatso's lessons, Aang finally feels ready to let go of the past and try to shape the future. We also discover that Osai used the attack on the Northern Water Tribe as a distraction to conquer Omasu. Azula stands next to the kneeling King Bumi. In chains, she proudly asks him, "What's next?" A monk shows Ozai that Sosin's comet is returning, just as it did 100 years ago. Remember, it was the comet that gave extra strength to the firebenders the night they raised the Southern Air Temple. Ozai will surely take advantage of this coming cosmic event, but we don't know more, so that's how this first season of Avatar: The Legend of the Airbender ends. Did you like it? Didn't you like it? Well, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a thing.